Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Antony.
And this is Words and Numbers. What's new and exciting in your world this week? He asked for no apparent reason.
Filed this story under government coming along to save us from ourselves. Federal regulators at the Department of Energy have proposed energy efficiency standards for ceiling fans.
Ceiling fans. The thing that sits on my ceiling.
Oh, the thing that's what? Everybody's top 10 list for what drives up your electric bill? No. I have no idea what it costs to run a ceiling fan. Nobody cares.
It's pennies. Compare that to the dollars it costs to run your air conditioning. When you run your ceiling fan, you don't run your air conditioning as much. Trust me, it's 128 degrees here today. I've got a ceiling fan and an air conditioner going right now. It actually saves you money by lowering your electric bill.
Well, and you've stumbled upon my point here. Appliances and devices that are more energy efficient have a natural market advantage. You shouldn't have to enact a regulation to force companies to make more energy efficient appliances. In the same way, you don't need a regulation to force car manufacturers to produce cars with better acceleration, or couches that come with more wear-resistant fabrics, or earbuds with better noise cancellation. You don't have to regulate those things. The market wants them.
That's crazy drug talk right there.
Look, consumers want more energy-efficient products, and we're willing to pay a premium for them. If regulators have to force efficiency, then there's something hidden going on that the regulators are overlooking. And I give, for example, that classic case of water-saving washing machines. This came through a regulation that washing machines aren't supposed to use more than whatever it is, so many gallons of water per cycle. And what happened? They didn't get clothes as clean. And so people coast to coast started running the same load of laundry twice to get it clean, and ended up using more water with the energy efficient washers than they did with the inefficient washers.
I give you also low flow toilets and low flow shower heads. These just irritate people, and they end up using more water to do the same job.
This has nothing to do with energy efficiency, but it's the same sort of thing. I was mowing the lawn today, and my gas can has one of those regulated spouts, and the purpose of the spout is that you don't spill the gasoline, but the spout is so cumbersome to use that you end up spilling it more than you would if the
only spill the gasoline.
If the spout weren't there, right? Exactly. And so we're at this point where if there's a good idea but you have to regulate it, then you're missing something. Now, here's what's going on. The DOE estimates that the more efficient ceiling fans will cost consumers an additional $90 million a year. But, says DOE, they will result in cost savings of over $280 million annually. Well, if that were the case, you don't need a regulation. Just tell me that, and I'll go out and spend the extra, because it's going to pay for itself 4 times over in the course of a year.
In 1 year.
In one year, right. So what's going on? Either the premium is going to be a lot more than $90 million, and or the cost savings will be a lot less than $280 million, and or there are additional costs that DOE hasn't considered. And one of them, which hadn't occurred to me, but you said it right off the top of your head. If you're going to make the fans more expensive, I'll be less likely to buy the fan, which means I'm going to be using the air conditioning more, and at the end, possibly using more electricity than I was before the energy-efficient fan came along.
This should have been the foolishness of the week right here.
Let me go back to the beginning, because I want to put the cost savings in perspective here. DOE is estimating that these regulations are going to save $280 million annually. And let's assume for the moment that DOE is correct in all of its calculations. There are roughly, 250 million households in the U.S.? These regulations are going to save each household a grand total of $1 per year.
This conversation becomes dumber by the minute, so I do declare that it is now over. And I want to talk about something that's called the urban doom loop. Do you know about this?
No.
It's commonsensical enough, and we've talked about it before without giving it the name. By the time journalists or economists or analysts give something a name, you probably have to deal with it a little more than you did the year before. What people are realizing now is that office space, shopping centers, right, retail space, They're all going empty. As they go empty, it's going to set off a series of dominoes falling. Money's not being collected on rent, and you can see where this goes. Right down the line, everybody ends up losing. The ultimate prediction here is that cities are going to be devastated by this. An entire generation now of workers has been trained to just don't go to work.
Right.
Although there's been a lot of pushback on it lately. You might recall I talked about corporate culture once upon a time and how it wouldn't be transmitted with a lot of people working at home. Well, don't you know, people are realizing that corporate culture is an issue, and they're not training people how to behave appropriately because they're not with them. But nonetheless, far fewer of us are sitting in offices now than before, which means anybody who's paying for those offices is overpaying, and they're starting to walk away from their rents, which puts landlords under all kinds of pressure. And when that happens, all those secondary players who make their living from landlords, they're not getting paid anymore either. And you can see how all the way down the line, this is going to be a lot of pain for a lot of different people.
I read recently some article, it was some Midwestern city, where the mayor was saying that businesses need to require their workers to come back because the local Starbucks, McDonald's, what have you, are losing business.
You know, people aren't buying lunch anymore. And doing that is, of course, a fool's errand. But I understand.
Mm-hmm.
When you see what's happening, and this is going to hit mid-sized cities first. You know, your Milwaukees of the world might have a different kind of trouble than, say, your Chicagos.
Right.
It's going to be very interesting to see what happens here. I think we've got a problem in the offing, which, of course, brings us to the foolishness of the week. As you know, it's campaign season. So, of course, there's lots of foolishness to pick from. Did I choose Joe Biden falling asleep in a Hawaii meeting? No. Did I choose Donald Trump capitalizing on his mugshot for T-shirts and coffee? No. Although both foolish, no. I'm going after Gavin Newsom and DeSantis, who are planning their own debate.
Really? Separate from the other candidates?
Yeah. Now, I know why DeSantis might want to do this, but I also know why Newsom might want to do this. And Joe Biden is irked, and Kamala Harris is pissed. She wants a clear path to the presidency, and Gavin Newsom is inserting himself into that path. I mean, he's the governor of California. Why would he be debating anyone right now?
How interesting.
How interesting is right. There are fissures on the Democratic side. The DeSantis angle, I think, is meaningless. But the Newsom angle here is fascinating. I can't help but think everybody involved is an idiot. Thus, the foolishness of the week.
We've only experienced it a couple times in our history, but is this how a major party begins to fracture?
No, if any party is going to fracture, it's the Republicans. The Republicans have a real problem right now. The people who love and think Donald Trump is a worthwhile candidate, believe anything he says, they are truth resistant. The rest of the Republicans know better. And that's a dangerous place to be. You've got a bifurcated party, and there's no hope of compromise there. If either of the two parties is going to go down in flames right now, it's the Republicans. Is that going to happen? I doubt it, but they run the risk of marginalizing themselves for decades because of this behavior. I suspect right now the Democrats fully expect that they're going to win the presidency, the House, and the Senate in the next election.
For one-stop shopping for all things James and Ant, visit our website, wordsandnumbers.org. We give a special shout-out to our Patreon sponsors who help us keep the lights on. If you'd like to contribute, go to patreon.com/wordsandnumbers. You watched the GOP debate live yesterday.
It was horrible.
I caught the video of it today.
I sat here in my office with the TV on, wondering why I didn't choose to do something else with my life.
Yeah, I was unimpressed all the way around with the candidates, with the moderators' questions, and with the audience. Do you remember the old show back in the early 90s, Morton Downey Jr.? He would have people come on the show as a talk show type thing, and invariably they're talking about government or social issues or whatever it is. And the whole thing, it was just a mosh pit. The audience constantly jeering or booing or cheering, whatever it is. And so the audience actually became a player in the whole thing. That's what this looked like.
At one point, Brett Baer, I guess, maybe Martha McCallum, referred to Donald Trump as the elephant not in the room. And I think that was about right. It was clear that the audience was in no small part a Trump audience. So there was literally nothing any of the guys on stage could do to get around that. Right? They're going to pay for that no matter what. But I thought of all the players that you mentioned, right, you've got the candidates on the one hand, the moderators on the other, and then the audience. The audience was the most shameful.
Yeah, I thought they were not well behaved at all.
No, and the moderators, I thought, pretty good on balance. Once again, I'm left to ask why they don't have microphone kill switches. If they're going to have a timer counting down how many more seconds you have to speak, why does your microphone still work after the ding?
Right.
We're either serious about the time or we're not. It's clear that we're not.
Yeah, because it gets the audience riled up. It makes for good television. And I agree with you. I think they did a good job as far as the actual mechanics of the debate are concerned. I was tallying the topics they asked about. They asked about, in no particular order, the Ukraine war, homelessness, crime, guns, abortion, climate change, the economy, education, and Donald Trump. Nowhere did they ask about the imminent demise of Social Security or the debt, the deficit. And a couple of the candidates did say things about the deficit, but nobody actually attacked those problems. And those are the biggest problems that the next president's going to be facing.
Or not facing, as the case may be.
Right, yeah.
Which is probably a lot more likely. When you think about how quick we are to ignore the biggest problems that we have, well, it's no surprise that the politicians follow.
Right.
What would you expect them to do? They're not going to touch those frayed wires unless we absolutely demand it. We most certainly don't.
But even on the topics that the moderators did raise, I don't think I heard a single candidate put forth any new idea. The governors were all talking about how they were fiscally prudent as governors. It made me wonder, actually, how many of those governors' states have balanced budget requirements. So I wonder if it's actually them being fiscally prudent or whether it's their constitution. Only one person said something that I had not heard before, and that was Scott. He said his tactic for fighting climate change was to bring jobs home. Who are the major sources of greenhouse gases? It's China, it's India. So bring American jobs back from there. I'm not saying that I agree with the strategy, but it was an interesting thing I hadn't heard before. And that, I think, was the only thing I hadn't heard before.
I'm ticking through my mind right now trying to remember if I heard anything, and I doubt that I did. But if that's your expectation walking into these things, you're going to be disappointed. That's not what happens at these things, because that's not what happens with politicians.
So let's pause there for a second. This is a GOP primary, so they're talking to GOP voters. In fact, not just GOP, but hardcore GOP voters. How do you see their messages changing now versus what you would expect during a general presidential campaign?
Look, everybody drifts back toward the center by the time you get to the general, but we don't even know what their messages are going to be yet, right? We've got a million more of these things to come. And you're going to see people drifting one way, drifting another. And that'll be interesting in and of itself.
Right.
Early on in the Twitter session last night, I referred to the group on stage as looking like a group of substitute teachers. And I'm going to stand by that. That's about right. Now, I think almost all of them come out of that debate better off than they went into it. And that's interesting.
Oh, you think so?
I think so. I don't think they walked in on a cloud. I don't think any of them were all that well off as they walked in. Mm-hmm. But I think they acquitted themselves relatively well, all things considered. I think that's not true of Mike Pence, who I think comes out about exactly the same as he went in, a non-issue.
It's interesting you say that, because as I'm looking at these and trying to summarize my thoughts on each candidate, Pence kept giving me the impression that he was more interested in showing up as somebody's VP running mate rather than the president. And I can kind of see his problem, right? Because he's living under the cloud of Trump. And you would hear him talk about things that he did during the 4 years of Trump, and he's trying to talk about this stuff without naming Trump.
He had 3 messages, right? I've been there before. I did the right thing when the pressure was on.
Yeah.
And I love Jesus.
Right.
The middle one, that's fantastic. He did do the right thing when the pressure was on. And Chris Christie is right. He deserves our respect forever.
Christie took a minute out to just say that we should all be thankful for what Pence did.
He's right. We should be. But that doesn't mean Mike Pence is ready to be or will ever ready to be president. He's not, and he won't be.
I didn't even get the sense he wanted to be president.
I do, but I don't think it goes any further than we saw last night. And I think Vivek
Ramaswamy, I liked him for the first 30 seconds.
And I monitored what was going on online after the debate, and people came after me pretty hard for my criticisms of Vivek. The people who loved Vivek walking in really loved him walking out. The rest of us wonder what the big deal is.
That's interesting, because I found myself wanting to like him at the outset.
Well, here's the thing, Ed. I walked in a complete blank slate. I had no opinion one way or the other. I had never paid any attention to him. I didn't really know a lot about him. I'm the regular guy that he was talking about when he said, allow me to introduce myself, because I didn't know about him. Mm-hmm. And within 10 minutes, he was a petulant teenager that I wanted to slap.
I got the sense that he wasn't properly prepared for this debate. He said at least one thing that even I, who don't know much about these things, know was a complete error. He says, look, he's a billionaire, he's founded companies and so forth, and what we need in Washington now is an outsider. That's exactly what we had with Trump, and that's exactly what Trump said. That is not something you say in a debate like this.
And what else did he say? Trump was the best president of the 21st century,
Yeah, and that kind of thing, I can see stirring up the GOP vote, which is what he was doing, but that's going to come back to haunt him in a general election.
Of course.
And he would never get the general vote.
And yet we're left with the specter of Trump yet again. Is there any way he's not the nominee? So he's being booked as we speak in a Georgia jail. Last night at the debate, the moderators loved asking, raise your hand if you would support a felon if he were the nominee. And a bunch of them raised their hands. Now, I know that they had to sign off on some kind of pledge to support the nominee, whoever it may be in the future. But boy, what if he's in prison? You still going to support him? Is that still your nominee?
There was one candidate that surprised me. In my mind, is standing head and shoulders above everybody else as the only adult in the room.
There was one who surprised me as well. One who walked out such a clear winner. Let's have a quick countdown and say the name to see if we agree.
Sure.
You ready?
Yep.
3, 2, 1.
Christie.
Nikki Haley.
Who did you say?
Nikki Haley.
Oh, no, I think Chris Christie. Now, I would put Haley as a number 2.
And I would put Christie second, actually. Christie was consumed, as he has been for a long time, by his hatred of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Right? That is his motivating factor. That's not her motivating factor at all. She's an interesting person, and I absolutely adored when she said, look, Joe Biden didn't do this to you. Republicans did this to you, too. I have never, ever heard a Republican say that.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, I haven't heard a Democrat say it about Democrats either, so let's not go crazy. But I've never heard a Republican say that, and it's unassailably correct. I like the idea of taking ownership of a problem. I like the idea of making peace with the fact that there is a problem. She mentioned 8 trillion. She didn't mention 33 trillion. On those grounds alone, I think she took it for me. When she looked at Vivek and said, you have no foreign policy experience, and it shows, that was a good moment for her, too.
Yeah, I was also impressed with the placing blame on the GOP for budget deficits and spending. Also, for jumping out and saying, when the question came about climate change, is climate change real? Of course, you know what the audience wants to hear. She says...
They wanted to hear what Vivek gave them.
Right.
It's a hoax.
She says, and it was beautiful, yes, it's real, but it's China and India that are the problems. The United States has cut its emissions in half over whatever X number of years it is. And if you really want to fight this problem, that's where you got to look. And I think that's absolutely right.
And we'll go one step further in our praise of Nikki Haley. When she got to abortion, as a woman, she gets a more sympathetic hearing than a man might. And I think that's fine. But what did she do with that sympathetic hearing? She said, look, doesn't matter how pro-life any of us happen to be, you don't have 60 pro-life senators.
Right.
And DeSantis came after her and said, the American people are overwhelmingly pro-life. Not true. But she didn't go after him that way. She said, I said senators. That's right. Hats off to you, Nikki Haley.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it for Nikki Haley. But if you want to make the case for Chris Christie, I'm happy to listen.
Christie has been on this stage for a number of presidential runs. He was pushing his fiscal and economic street cred. He attracts my attention right off for being a Democratic governor in a very blue state. That tells me that there's something about him that can bring both sides together. And that's exactly the kind of person that I think we need at this point in history.
I think he did better than I thought he would. He was more impressive than I thought he would be.
He said something, and several of the other candidates echoed, that the way to deal with crime now is we need to have our attorney generals prosecute more crimes and fund police more and all of this business, which to me just rings hollow. It sounds like you're hitting the symptom, not the disease.
And I think for me, the most unnerving part of last night, and this is probably the best way to start talking about DeSantis, is everybody's insistence, willingness, fervor, that we need to go bomb Mexico for whatever the reason it is we need to bomb Mexico, right? This idea of putting a military on the border and military incursions into Mexico and fentanyl over and over and over again.
Right.
The issue with DeSantis is that he's kind of like a CPA. He doesn't have much of a personality, and he's more of a functionary. And look, embrace it. If that's what you are, that's what you are. But his people have decided to talk him into becoming a tough-talking blowhard. When he points his finger at the camera and he says, and they'll end up dead, you got to be kidding me. Who can take DeSantis seriously when he's behaving this way? Who can take the rest of them seriously when they take that as some indication of what they're supposed to say next? They followed his lead. Why can't people say, and here's a crazy idea I want to push out there. Mexico is a sovereign nation, and they could do whatever they want within their borders. And we have a war on drugs that was ill-advised from the moment we declared it in the Nixon administration. So we're going to undeclare it right now. You got a problem with drugs coming over the Mexican border? You just solved that problem.
That kind of fresh idea on any topic, I didn't hear from anybody here.
The American people aren't going to have new ideas. People expect far too much of candidates. I think you do too, and I don't think you expect much of anything. And I still think you expect too much of them. If you thought there was going to be anything new coming out of this crowd, yeah, you expect too much.
Yeah.
I think what you should expect is 8 or 10 or 12 people figuring out which way the wind blows and getting right in line with it. And that's what they're going to do. Here's the thought experiment for you. We do this every 4 years. And every 4 years, two groups of human beings rally around, ultimately, two candidates, and they each say the same thing. Our guy is perfect, and everything about your guy is wrong. And if we do all the things that our guy says we need to do, then everything will be fine. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, every 4 years we elect one clown or the other. We do those things, and nothing ever gets fixed.
Oh, no, nothing ever gets fixed, but we do get a larger government every time we go through this.
Well, sure, but were people rational? I know they're not. So again, were people rational, they would think, hey, wait a second. We've heard this before, 4, 8, 12, 16, ad nauseum years ago.
Right.
And it didn't work. Every year, the debt gets bigger. Every year, we're 1 year closer to insolvency on Social Security and Medicare. Where are all these fools saying, all we have to do is this? Now, clearly, if you think these clowns are solving our problems, you're wrong. They won't. They're solving their problems.
So tell me, In your opinion, how does this play out? We've got this slate of candidates, and I heard you say earlier you think Trump is going to end up with the nomination.
It's hard to see how he doesn't right this second.
Is he actually running?
Yeah. Seeing as how I'm on a rant here, the rant gets a little worse with each passing minute. But, as I often say, and another thing, Donald Trump went on with Tucker Carlson on Twitter, or X, and all of the Trump fools came out of the woodwork and they said, Harrigan, you idiot, 81 million people have watched the Trump thing. No, they have not. 81 million people is 25% of the American population. Do you think 25% of the American population can find Tucker Carlson's Twitter feed? How many of that population are over the age of 70, under the age of 10? If you're on Twitter and any tweet with that event passes your feed, you just got counted as a viewer.
Right.
Literally everybody on Twitter can be a viewer 12, 15, 20 times.
So if Trump is actually running, why was he not on the stage? Not invited, too busy getting booked into jail?
Oh, no. He was invited. He chose not to go. Well, invited is not the right word. He could have gone had he wanted to, but he knows he's so far out in front that there's nothing but drawback and no benefit to going.
Do you think then that we're not going to hear from him until we get to the point that the Republicans are actually selecting a contender?
I mean, we heard from him last night on Tucker Carlson. You hear from him every day.
So if he does get the Republican nomination, I can't imagine any scenario in which he wins the general election. Well, no, I can imagine one scenario in which he possibly wins the general election, and that is that Democrats do an equally stupid thing and do something like put Biden up for a second round.
Well, I mean, putting Biden up is the smarter of the things for Democrats because Kamala Harris is roundly despised.
Granted, there's something worse they could do.
I mean, the only way the Democrats could beat anybody other than Trump, I think, would be to remove Kamala Harris, replace her with someone inoffensive, have Joe Biden step down, have that new vice president ascend to the presidency, and then have that person run. Now, people are whispering Gavin Newsom's name. He's not the right answer. He's run California into the ground. I don't know who would be the right answer. I honestly don't. But this would be the right move for them were they looking to win the election and then afterwards be able to govern. But if Joe Biden's going to run, which I think is stupid, but if he's going to run, the smart play would be to have him run against Trump. You want somebody new who would bring some new understanding of the way to run for the presidency, or do you want to run against the clown you've already beaten once and who people despise more now than they did when you beat him? Were I Joe Biden, I would be pardoning Donald Trump right now.
Yeah, he's no longer a martyr.
He survives now because he says, evil Joe Biden is keeping his jackboot on my forehead. If I were Joe Biden, I'd say you are hereby pardoned. What are you going to say now? It's a foolproof approach. I don't know why he hasn't done it already, frankly.
But this election is shaping up to be similar to the previous two elections in which I said it appears that neither party wants to win. Or let me say it differently, Americans are faced with choosing the lesser of the evils. It's less an election of who you want than an election of who you don't want.
Yeah. And that's all the time we've got this week on Words and Numbers. Until next time, be sure to follow us on Twitter. Handles are in the show notes. Join Words and Numbers Backstage, the Facebook group where the conversation continues, and
send us email, wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com.
Until next week, try to be nice to one person who doesn't deserve it. Just one. And who knows, it may turn into a trend. Give it a shot. You might feel good about yourself.
You could say you tried.
You tried, that's right. Till next week, can't take it easy.
See you next week, James.